Hi, I'm Felipe,
Hi, I'm Jacob.
I'm Mary.
I'm Ian.
and this is our podcast.
Yes.
We're talking about acclaimed artist Keith Haring. Pretty interesting person, actually. He was born in 1958 in Pennsylvania. Nuclear family, religious, Christian, I believe. He had three sisters. He was raised by his mother and father. His dad was a cartoonist, which I definitely believe to some degree influenced like his work.
Yeah, it runs in the family.
Yeah, exactly. And his family did support like artistic pursuits. I think as a kid his dream job was to sort of work with Walt Disney and make animations and stuff like that. And so later in his life in 1978 he moved to New York to study arts.
Yeah, he studied at the School of Visual Arts in New York, one of the most popular art institutions up there.
It's a very creative name.
You know, it's funny that you say that his dad was a cartoonist because you can like really tell in his art style.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can obviously see it's sort of like, you know, people say sometimes the people that do like the simplest art have like some of the most crucial understanding of it,
Mm-hmm.
because like to make art that feels simple to like a layman, you have to have a pretty fundamental understanding of those
you have to have a
characteristics.
good understanding of like composition and color and all that.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Just like crazy simple shapes, straight to the point.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can kind of see, I think you can kind of see, like, especially, like, if you're looking at, like, you know, if he's growing up in, like, 60s, 70s kind of era, right? You can sort of see the Disney, a little bit of, like, the Disney influence, I feel like, in the way that, like, his style is very quite linear with, again, some, like, more abstract shapes. I think you can still see some of that influence, especially, like, just even basic principles of, like, animation, right? Like, you can almost, like, see, like, or stretch and squash kind of stuff, and it really translates in his art. It feels like it's moving.
Yeah, even with his like simplistic style, you can't like understate the talent that it takes to be able to work with solid. Because he would go paint on the wall, no erasers. He had solid lines going all the way through, completely confident in what he could do.
You know what's actually funny? I haven't quite thought about this, but like it does sort of remind me like the fact that like it's a lot of his styles, like his like street art and stuff like that, is very like repetitive. Like it is a lot of like similar shapes with like patterns like that are coinciding. It kind of does remind me of like cell art, where it's like you like sort of like flip through, like when you're making a little booklet when you're like in grade school, like kind of reminds you of that, like almost like imitation of the animation process through his art, right?
Of course.
Yeah, kind of. It's even more impressive because, like, most of his earlier art, I mean, I don't even think there's, like, a comprehensive, like, documentation of all of it there in, like, the subways of New York.
I've been working the subway in New York for about the past 2.5 years. Where I draw is on where they usually have advertisements on the platform, and when they don't have enough advertisements, they put empty black paper to cancel out the old ad.
I see.
So I noticed these about 2.5 years ago on my way through the subway, and immediately went above ground and bought some chalk and went back down.
This is one of your works here?
Yeah.
And this is permissible? I mean, you're not breaking any law?
Is this illegal or not?
Yeah, it is technically illegal. It depends on the policeman that catches you. I have been handcuffed and arrested. Sometimes I'm just given $10 fines, or...
Oh, yeah. Or sometimes told to move along, buddy,
yeah. Or sometimes when they catch me, they're eager to meet me because they've been wondering who was doing it this long.
And like it just get taken down in like a couple of hours.
Yeah, well, it wasn't even paint. His first couple works were just
chalk
on whiteboards, and he would just go up and do it as fast as possible, and that's kind of like his creative idea of just getting as much out there as possible for as many people to see.
It's more important to make a lot of different things and keep coming up with new images and things that were never made before.
Yeah.
Instead of like wanting his art hung up in galleries for a few dozen people to see every day, he just wanted as many people to kind of see and relate to his work as he could.
Yeah, I think that's definitely goes into like the themes that he had in his art, like, you know, a lot of stuff that people like recognize, you know, money, capitalism, etc. A lot of were less sexual than some of the other ones, but I should have looked at more of them while I was researching, but I remember seeing one that was like an alien picking up a guy. That one was pretty neat. And he'd get caught by the police. Like, I mean, I guess that's why he had to draw him so fast too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, I think it kind of does tie into the fact that, like, you know, pretty early in his career he was like openly gay as well, right? Like, so I think that sort of like that openness and like, you know, the art should be for everybody kind of mentality sort of does contribute to that, because again, like being openly gay in early 80s, you know, right? So I think that sort of contributes to that idea of like the accessibility and you know, the fact that it's that he wanted art not to just be restricted to, again, those gallery spaces, but, you know, for like somebody just, you know, going to work at the subway or something, right?
Yeah, and like the roots in graffiti art in that kind of like anti-establishment style also reflect like his personal life. That I think influenced a lot of his work and how he proceeded once he did get that kind of platform and stayed to that more graffiti style. Everybody, you know, he put all his stuff on like t-shirts, mugs.
In fact, in '86, what was it? He saw that like everyone was making like knockoffs and putting his stuff on like T-shirts, so he was like, "Fuck it, I'm gonna do it myself." And so he opened this store in New York called the Pop Shop, and it sold like reasonably, like fairly cheap, like T-shirts and buttons and other like memorabilia with his art printed on it, so like people could like, you know, get it from the source, I suppose, which is, I mean, I think that also sort of ties into his whole wanting art.
Trying to make money, trying to make a point. Right?
Yeah, like art should be as accessible for everyone. I mean, that what's his direct quote? Art is for everybody. That's what he said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So like, yeah, I think that sort of works with the idea of just wanting to have everyone be able to access the art that he made.
And I think the sort of like, you know, virality of his art also sort of reflects like, again, his queerness in himself too, because sort of like, again, like you said, like the anti-establishmentarianism kind of mentality that he had, sort of like challenging the taboos and homophobia that all these people had. And you know what, like even as a queer artist, you know, I can assume that his art got so popular to a point where like people that might have been sort of like homophobic towards him didn't even know that he was gay, so they would still purchase his stuff and like sort of like not even think about it, right? Yeah.
I don't know as much about like 80s New York as I probably should, but like from what I can tell, the art scene in there was pretty damn queer.
Yeah.
Like you had like Andy Warhol and like Jean-Michel Basquiat, like really mainstream artists who were all like openly gay at the time, sort of doing their thing.
Yeah, and you know what? It's funny that you bring up some of those guys, because like he did like sort of do a lot of collaborations with queer or people of color, like minority groups, or like minority collaborations, I guess you could say, with and I think that sort of again forwards the movement of like, you know, the queer art scene that you're talking about, right, against like a homophobic society, right, at the time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also like ties into how he wanted so much of his work just out there, so that as many people could like see it and almost like relate to it, so that as many people could know that there was other people in the same simplistic kind of situations, not simplistic situations, but the art depicting them was in a simplistic way, kind of empowering that same message to as many people as he could.
I was doing research. In '89, he painted a huge mural in Barcelona titled "Together We Can Stop AIDS." And it's not in the gallery, it's like outside. You want to like show as much people, obviously, as you can.
Yeah. And that's interesting. The time that he had that he was doing that mural, he had already been diagnosed with AIDS at the time. Quote, "There is one question George is asked about life and art, and which is more important. And George said, art is more important because it is immortal. This struck a very deep note inside me, for I am quite aware of the chance that I have or will have AIDS. The odds are very great, and, in fact, the symptoms already exist. My friends are dropping like flies, and I know in my heart that it is only divine intervention that has kept me alive this long. I don't know if I have 5 months or 5 years, but I know my days are numbered. This is why my activities and projects are so important now, to do as much as possible as quickly as possible. I'm sure that what will live on after I die is important enough to make sacrifices of my personal luxury and leisure time. Work is all I have, and art is more important than life." I believe this was written before he was diagnosed, obviously, because, you know, of the chance. And I think that, the thing is, like, the AIDS epidemic started in, like, the really early 80s.
Right.
Yeah. So, like, he was aware of that possibility for, like, most of his time that he spent in New York. The possibility that, I might get AIDS eventually, but he still sort of continued to, you know, live a queer lifestyle, go to nightclubs, etc. It's like, I think that idea of just like, even if you sort of have the sword of Damocles hanging over your head, threatening to drop at any minute, still sort of persevering and continuing to live your life the way that you want to, even if it might kill you, and continuing to create as much art and work and trying to get that work to reach as many people as possible is I think that's just a really admirable philosophy for anyone to have. And it's also like, I mean, that's a situation that he wasn't the only person in that situation. Basically every gay person was in the exact same situation where they were faced with the choice of, okay, I could sort of keep living my life, you know, the way I want to and, you know, expressing myself the way I want to, or I could just not.
Yeah, you know what? It actually does align very well with how he's established himself, even like before like the sort of like mainstream widespread of AIDS epidemic had sort of gone around and gotten to that level where a lot of people were talking about it. It does sort of align with that sort of like the government's not doing anything, like this idea of government neglect towards, you know, helping out people suffering from AIDS and stuff like that. And I bet, you know, in the, especially in the art community in the 80s, like you said earlier, like a very queer space, like it was probably a very heavy topic to think about. It's probably really like upsetting to think about. And the fact that there are people like, you know, Keith Haring that are still making art in the face of all this like adversity, you know, on top of everything else that they've already had to face. And the sort of face of like chaos, and it sort of is a testament to like his will, and you know, like your guys' quotes, right? Like the fact that like he knows that he might be susceptible to it at this point, right? And yet he still feels as if he has to do it because it's what he loves to do, right?
And that kind of ties into one of my favorite one of his works, which was just titled The Unfinished Painting. It was made in 1989, and it's just a blue square in the corner, like a half-done one of his works with like the dripping paint down half the canvas. And it was done, I believe, a year before his death in 1990. It always stuck with that kind of, that unfinished life of his and so many people at that time from the AIDS epidemic in New York especially, that I think it really resonated with his whole career's message, and it kind of summed up everything that was really great about him.
Yeah, this sort of idea of like you just have this like thing that you're just working on, and then it just gets cut short, and it's like it just kind of ruins the whole thing, you know. And I mean, he passed away in 1990. Yeah. 90. Yeah. So he was only 32. So like that's pretty damn young.
But he did so much in that time. Like if you just Google his work, there's hundreds and hundreds of different pieces that he managed to accomplish in one very short lifetime. It's quite impressive.
And I think, you know, even like including not only his art but also his like philanthropic stuff, like his foundation and stuff like that, you sort of do see like a lot of that emerging from like queer people at the time. Like even now, like I mean, his foundation is still really prevalent, but you look at something like, you know, Elton John's foundation for, you know, HIV and AIDS and stuff like that, right, where they're planning on trying to eradicate as much as possible, you know, by the time. And it's obviously something that, like, you know, for people that survived it or never you know, got diagnosed with it or whatever, it's something that deeply affects people to this day, to the fact that like it's the fact that it's like still prevalent is obviously still weighing really heavy on these queer artists of the past. Like I'm sure if Keith Haring was still alive today, like he would really still be a very strong advocate for, you know, making sure that these people get the proper diagnosis, they aren't stigmatized, right? Because if you already got the homophobic stigma, on top of that you also got the HIV/AIDS stigma as well, right? Yeah. It's like treating people like lepers and, you know,
that's
stuff
a
like
big
that, right?
part of what his foundation does is not just spreading for like good health and treatment across the world, but also spreading for that kind of awareness and bringing it into a more accepted space when people have to still have this lifelong disease. Even if it's treated, it has that stigma that they're trying to get rid of. Yeah. I think that's a pretty big part of his foundation's work.
Yeah, he made the foundation about a year before his death, so like even that sort of act was like in response to this idea of, I know I don't have much time left, so I guess in a way like his sort of work carries on in that sense.
Yeah, you know what's actually interesting about that is because, you know, his whole you know, artistic values, right, about like anti-capitalism and, you know, all this, again, like I said, anti-establishmentarianism, but it does even reflect in like his foundation, right? Like you see somebody who's, you know, he recognizes the fact that he's also profited off of the system that he criticizes, and he puts that back into making sure that he's helping, you know, the people that need it, right? If he's sort of accepted come to terms with the death, you know, you can't take your money with you, right?
Yeah.
So might as well put it somewhere where it matters.
Definitely, that kind of putting back what he took from that system that he criticizes is a really great point, because his foundation has done so much work, and I think far beyond giving back what little he would have taken from the system that he didn't love so much.
Okay, tangent time. I think his art style. Okay, it's not to say that it wasn't like an intentionally designed like sort of style that he developed himself, but I think a lot of it was designed out of practicality and taking into consideration the fact that he would have to make these drawings in like a very short period of time. And not only that, they'd have to be something that would stand out to people that were just walking by. So I think that's definitely part of the reason he uses such thick lines and bold colors in his works, is because it just had to be like that, otherwise no one would have noticed it.
I think that's a good spot. Like, that's probably what inspired him to originally make his work like that. But after his work became so known, I think it was almost like he was known for that style and not for, like, himself too much. Yeah. So it's kind of like this repeating cycle.
Yeah, it's one of those situations where you just, like, you do something by accident, it's like, oh, I guess I gotta keep doing it like this now. I might as well try to figure out how to use this art style that I'm basically stuck with to the best of my ability, kind of.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it, but I guess like now that you bring up the thick lines, it is probably a byproduct of using like chalk, right? Like, especially like artistic chalk, like different from like, you know, obviously like the blackboard chalk and stuff like that, where it's like, you know, you can get like pretty thick lines from it. It's a bit harder to like have precision and stuff like that. So, you know, making sure that you can do it fast with, you know, simple shapes, colors, and you know, you can kind of get that. It's pretty accessible too, right?
And the origins of these being like on the wall of a subway where you've got hundreds of people walking by, maybe look over for a second and then keep going about their day. He needed to have these kind of messages that he wanted to send out be readable that fast, because that's how fast people were walking by his work. So the bold kind of characteristics, I think, were mainly meant to help communicate that message as fast and as impactfully as possible.
I mean, that's
to talk about these skills, like I do art myself, and I do like, you know, animation and blah blah blah, those kind of things, and it's really something like it takes skills to do like something that fast, and it's like the shape that he wanted to do that in seconds, and it's like still really good.
Yeah, to have the lines like on like the way the lines connect, like they're very uniform. Like you don't see any like he pulled it just a bit too far and then one's poking it. Like I haven't seen a piece of it.
Yeah, the control of the lines, the line quality,
Yeah.
Well, actually, why don't I ask you a question? Like, as a visual, I don't really do a lot of visual art myself, but like, as like an artist like that, like, how do you see any like inspiration in like art that you maybe yourself take inspiration from, like artists that you sort of like, you know, maybe look up to or stuff like that? Do you see any inspiration from that sort of like simplicity, or like, do you think he's had more of a lasting effect, or is it just more like a pop-up thing?
A lot of his art actually remind me of this guy on Instagram that I used to follow. It's called Mr. Doodle, and it's like, I don't think it's related at all, but then he does have...
That's definitely...
Yeah, right?
Yeah, no, I know that guy.
You know that guy? It definitely reminds me of,
Yeah, no, I'm almost certain that his whole thing was inspired by that. Like, absolutely. It's too similar for it to just be a coincidence.
Really similar,
I guess there's no context here. Mr. Doodle, I guess what he's most well known for is he basically painted his entire house white, and then he like drew over it with this thick black marker, and it's I think he what was it, like a stop motion video out of it. It's a really impressive video. If you can put that in post, that would be really cool.
Yeah, but also, I mean, Keith Haring also painted a whole house in his style.
He did?
Yeah, I'm not sure if it was a whole house or just like a room, like his creative space. But like, if I remember my research correctly, he did have like a home where his art was all over the walls. So even the base concept, this Mr. Doodle guy is clearly like...
Oh yeah, hold on, yeah. No, like that's...
Oh yeah.
That's totally... Yeah, that's so cool.
And so just seeing these like impacts, even now, years after he's gone. I mean, I still own a bunch of his like stuff on shirts. I love it. It's great.
You know, it kind of also reminds me of like Neolithic sort of era paintings and stuff like that, where it's like obviously like tens of thousands of years ago when you're just drawing on like walls of caves and stuff like that. It does sort of like, you know, sort of attest to that idea of like simplicity spreading a message that is sort of like universally recognized. And I think that also is a part of his appeal, right? The sort of like mass recognition where somebody from, you know, like Kenya or, you know, Sweden can sort of both see the same thing and recognize the same shapes. It does sort of remind me of like those more Neolithic, like have you guys seen that like sort of like Mexican like deity and stuff like that? You know, where it's kind of like the same kind of like shapes, even though it is sort of a bit of like amorphous kind of thing. You still kind of get what it's trying to say and stuff like that. Yeah,
and also like those kind of cave paintings that were put on, these simple characters put on the walls, fucking hundreds of thousands of years ago, and people still talk about them today. And I'd like to think in 100,000 years people will still be referring to Keith Haring's work.
Yeah, you'd hope, right? Like it's awesome.
I also think that the choice to make the way he draws like the people, he generally chooses to have them remain genderless, which I think is that's got to say something about his art. Like I feel like it makes it more universal, I guess.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff, it also does attest to like his audience, because I do believe like a lot of his more erotic stuff were like isolated to more like gallery spaces and stuff like that, while his more, I guess, more general sort of art is definitely, you know, for a more general audience, right? Than a more sort of artistically focused sort of group, right?
You also have to consider like he was making these in public. Like he could probably get in like really big trouble if he did that. Yeah. Like, you know, that would definitely be considered a more serious crime than just doing drawings that are not explicit, I think, for sure.
Yeah, and I think it would also like sort of hurt his credibility, even if and I guess that's why he sort of lent more into that when he became more established. Because, you know, I think even though he was inspired by graffiti, he didn't really want to necessarily be associated with like the impact of graffiti in the cultural zeitgeist. He didn't really want to be like associated with that, where it's more like he didn't want to have it be perceived as like a nuisance. It would be more something like to be appreciated rather than to be like erased, right?
Yeah, I believe he specifically chose he sort of perceived it as like I think he had a lot of respect for graffiti actually, but I think he specifically made an effort to sort of not muscle in on like other graffiti artists' territory, sort of, because, you know, that would have been seen as disrespectful, I suppose. And thanks for listening to our podcast.
Thank you so much. Tune in next time.